22nd June 1941. Over the next few days, the Nazi advance into Eastern Europe will occupy Lithuania. But already, this tiny Baltic country is witnessing events so barbaric, they will foreshadow the Holocaust. 70 years on, this murderous local history has resurfaced, threatening the very fabric of Europe's collective memory.
What is happening here is a rewriting of history.
At the beginning of the war, almost 250,000 Lithuanians were Jewish.
It was the center of Jewish life in Eastern Europe.
But within just 6 months, the majority of Lithuania's Jews were dead, slaughtered mostly by their own Lithuanian countrymen.
Istorinė, sakykime, dėmė ir dėl kai kurių.
It's an inconvenient past for this young EU nation.
Jews killed by Lithuanians, independent of the Nazis.
Atrocities that the right-wing government would prefer to erase.
There is a new politics of intolerance right across Europe.
Lithuania is a laboratory for the campaign to rewrite the history of World War II.
A plan to turn victims into perpetrators by accusing Holocaust survivors of war crimes.
This is not just like a Jewish issue, you know. It's a broader issue about ultranationalism, about democracy.
But two eccentric professors are standing up for historical truth.
History is the new tool of the far right.
Unlikely Davids taking on the government Goliath to prevent this rewriting of history.
Somehow, it's just gone right under the radar.
To win the battle, they will face overwhelming odds. And to protect the truth, they must break the law.
So either we're going to mention the things we're fighting against, or it's not worth doing.
The fate of Lithuania's Jews at the hands of local militia in the days before the Nazis took control is documented history. But how it is remembered is now a new battle, threatening the entire historical record.
The Lithuanians don't deny that Lithuanian Jewry were killed. They don't deny that there was genocide here. But what they are not prepared to admit is that the Lithuanian population was at the forefront in actively killing the Jewish community. It preceded the arrival of the Nazis.
When Australian academic Danny Ben Moshe first came to Lithuania, all he wanted was to find his grandmother's house in the family shtetl, or village, of Dusetos.
The roots trip, you know.
Rabbi's house.
Do that, be moved by it, and then, you know, move on.
Unable to locate the exact house, Danny took comfort being at the lake in his family's stories. He was completely unaware of the dark history about to rise up and change his life. It all began with a secret deal. In March 1939, Germany annexed Western Lithuania. Then in August, Hitler struck an accord with Stalin. Named for the two ministers who signed it, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact secretly divided Europe between Germany and Russia, with Lithuania given to the Soviets. For 2 years, Lithuania suffered Soviet occupation, enduring land appropriation, imprisonment, deportations and killings. But for Lithuanian Jews, Soviet rule was still preferable to the Nazi alternative.
Of the two evils, they preferred the communists for good reason. In other words, if you have to choose between losing your life or losing your cultural life and religious life, it's a no-brainer.
So Jews were regarded as Bolshevists, charged or blamed for Soviet occupation, for Soviet rule, for the arrest and mass deportations of Lithuanian.
Then on June 22nd, 1941, Hitler abandoned his pact, attacking Russia and invading Lithuania. The Red Army fled, and in those few critical days before the Nazis took control, armed militants from the Lithuanian Activist Front and other Nazi-aligned groups put on white armbands and attacked the fleeing Soviets. Seeking revenge, some white armbanders began killing Jews in dozens of locations.
It's an onslaught, a public butchery of beating people to death, of raping women, ransacking shops, houses, and then driving Jews to a marketplace or another spot where they were simply beaten to death.
Die Deutschen seien noch nie gewesen. Die Litwiner, was sie gewesen mit den Weißen gemachten Pogrom.
Mesha Priest's living room wall is a monument to the horrors he lived through in World War II. Horrors that began on that fateful day when the Lithuanian militia took control. Mesha was just 11 years old.
Всю ночь там орудовали. Там с топорами, там с ножами, с вилами. Взрослых, детей, всех подряд. Тогда взял один с гармошка и начали на трупы с ногами и начали играть. Те люди, которые смотрели, хлопали и кричали «Ура!».
The white armbands, who, yes, in their own right, were fighting the Soviets and indeed securing Lithuanian independence, were the very same people, organisations and units who were killing Jews. So, here's a problem for contemporary Lithuania.
When heroes are killers, truth becomes the enemy. Hiding the murderous actions of certain Lithuanian nationalists appears to motivate the rewriting of history now, blurring the facts for political ends.
Wie man sagt in Jiddisch, es ziehe mir die Fies, zu beweisen, als Iden sind gegangen, nicht wie Schäfchen zu der Schritte, als sie haben gekämpft.
89-year-old librarian Fania Bransovsky is one of a small number of Lithuanian Holocaust survivors. She joined the resistance, fighting the Nazis alongside Soviet partisans. Fania, along with other Jewish partisans, is now under investigation for involvement in war crimes committed by Soviet partisans.
History has become a tool now of the far right in Eastern Europe. They're being accused of surviving because it was the only way a Jew could survive, was to join the resistance.
Fania's supervisor, world-renowned Yiddish scholar Professor David Katz, moved to Vilnius University after an illustrious career at Oxford and Yale.
Well, I had about 8.5 years of complete peace and tranquility here. Then in May 2008, when the police came looking for our librarian, Fania Yochelis Bransovsky, I began a campaign. Well, I'm not a political activist by nature. I'm a Yiddish professor, a Yiddish researcher. I'm a Yiddish dialectologist. For me, love of Yiddish always went with love of Yiddish-speaking people. So if they're being accused of being war criminals, we have to defend them. It's the same thing.
David's roots are also in Lithuania, which has a Jewish history going back 700 years. Before his solo campaign to defend Fania waylaid him, David had invested 20 years searching for the last Yiddish-speaking survivors, gathering and recording remnants of the language at every opportunity.
In one sense, the last 3 years have been a great distraction from that life's work. But in another sense, it's part of the same thing. Moreno, Horav, Meishe, Veyonav, a special word from Lithuanian gravestone language, a Hebrew acronym, V'yotzonish Mosai B'Taira, and his soul went up in purity, 1874.
But standing up for principle had a price.
I'm losing my job and my income? Yes, absolutely, yes. I have no regrets. I'll be proud all my life that I spoke. I would never have been able to face myself had I remained silent.
So we crossed the roads.
Yeah.
Is this now where the Jews moved to?
Back in Vilnius, Professor Danny Ben-Moshe is continuing his roots tour, guided by historian and author Rachel Kostanyan.
Such was the pavement before, and full of kiosks, various kind of gurvich. You can see.
Is this where we're standing?
Well, somewhere here.
So this is this street here.
On the right. It was very, very vibrant community that had huge choirs in Yiddish. It had a developed school system. These people who lived here, they were giants. In my mind, I keep them always, these great men. I'm proud, but I'm very sad. And the world is going mad about anti-Semitism. It became wider.
Visiting the only remaining synagogue of over 100 in Vilnius, Danny finds himself conflicted. More connected to the land and its rich Jewish heritage, but even more disturbed by a rising sense of loss.
This was the very road that my family and every other single Jew from Dussetos was marched down by locals into the death pit.
It's a numbing feeling.
Line up, in you go. Line up, in you go.
It's just numbing. On the one hand, at least it's some sort of grave, you know, for the family you never knew. Yet somehow it just seems so impersonal. You don't know if the bones are in a pile over here or over there. What these trees witnessed. Kind of imagine what would have been, you know, if you think this space times 2, it's 8,000 bodies. And what I read was that because, of course, not everybody died immediately, they were shot, but they survived or whatever, the ground moved for 3 days. 3 days. And all that's just going through my head is a story. A story about a father who
who didn't want to see his children shot. So he went in front of his children and asked the local killers here to kill him first. And the children didn't want to see their father die. So they stood, bizarre scenario, they stood in front of the father asking the killers to kill them. Sort of, that's the absurd situation people were put in. It's not like this was an aberration that happened in one particular place. This happened across the country. I think everyone whose ancestors come from here, whose families died here, we all have a duty and responsibility to speak out about what is going on now. We have the moral authority to do that in the way perhaps someone else doesn't.
Lithuanians had welcomed German annexation of their western borders prior to the war. 2 years later, they celebrated the Nazi invasion for ending the hated Soviet rule. As the Soviets fled, eyewitnesses and photographs testify to Lithuanian white armbanders murdering local Jews.
One of the points of contention is the fact that the Lithuanians are trying to deny that Lithuanians murdered Jews before the Nazis arrived.
Invited to Lithuania's only Holocaust museum, Professor Danny Ben-Moshe discovers it's one of the few places where the facts are undisputed.
You see a room after the pogrom. You can see here dead people, mostly pious, mostly religious. This is Raf Osowski. His head was sawed off by a saw and put on the Torah.
For over 20 years, Rachel has dedicated her life to teaching this bloody local history.
First, in the beginning of the 90s, I was passionately willing to share the knowledge I got with the entire world. Later, I couldn't. I felt that I can't speak anymore about it.
The relentless campaign to obscure the truth has succeeded in undermining Rachel's work.
Impossible to say what you feel. Humiliation, terrible humiliation, and rage. Rage to those who were spreading the mad theory about race, and those who picked it up with pleasure and followed.
After the war, the Soviets reoccupied Lithuania, ruling with an iron fist for the next 40 years and subjecting Lithuanians to extreme trauma, persecution and killings.
From 20,000 Lithuanian freedom fighters who were killed, and for example, you see woman, but holes in your eyes. Special operations.
These brutal Soviet years underpin the next phase of the government campaign to equate Lithuanian suffering under Stalin with the Jewish Holocaust, or Shoah, a strategy known as double genocide.
And this has enormous implications, because if it's true, then two things happen. One is that the Shoah is no longer unique, okay? Two, communism is genocide. Victims of communism have not gotten the recognition that they deserve. So they're trying to latch onto the Holocaust and say, we went through the same thing. Give us the same treatment.
And to reinforce this comparison, the Parliament passed a new law.
It says that anybody who denies or belittles either genocide, in other words, anybody who doesn't believe in the two genocides, can be punished up to a maximum of 2 years in prison. It's
proved by documents, by witnesses. It is proved part of Lithuanians killed Jews.
For me, it's part of the same bigger attempt to rewrite history in the spirit of the bogus, the fake equalization of Nazi and Soviet crimes.
I don't know how to compare. I don't know what to say.
Young countries politically need their role models, they need their national myths to establish themselves. The problem here is those national heroes and myths happen to be those who are responsible for the mass murder of a 700-year-old Jewish community.
When Dovid began supporting the accused Jewish partisans, he wasn't yet breaking the law. But speaking out still cost him his livelihood. He found himself alienated from his fraternity. A lone voice, single-handedly battling the well-funded government machine on a website he'd started.
The website is the modern slingshot of David and Goliath because it enables one guy with no money and now with no job to keep the second opinion alive, at least for a couple of years. It's been 2 years now. And I think it's raising awareness, and it's where people go for the second opinion.
By chance, it was the website that brought the two professors together.
When I came here and I met Dovid and I met people in the community, everyone was happy to call on Dovid's services, embassies, organisations, media. And while he was there for everyone else, he was really left on his own. He's got into this situation because no one else has been prepared to go on the record in the way he has. I would very much like to be able to help him.
To give Danny a first-hand view, Dovid takes him to meet Fanya.
And this is where Fanya lives. Danny, Fanya.
Hi. How do you say nice to meet you in Yiddish?
Afagenigen.
Afagenigen. Dovid has told me a lot about you and about the partisans. It's a real honor to meet someone who lived that life.
The only member of her family to survive, Fanya was one of 6 young girls who managed to escape from the Vilnius ghetto on the very day it was liquidated. She agrees to give Danny a tour.
Luft angreifen.
So we're in the ghetto now.
Her apartment was those 3 windows in the middle floor on the right.
Yeah. So these were the steps from the time of the ghetto?
Yes.
The same.
The same, yes.
Wow.
And this is the entrance to the apartment as it was.
Nu, das ist der Letzte, was ist mir geblieben von der Mischproche. Es ist mir sehr, sehr schwer, weil ich da allem verloren.
Discarding their yellow stars, the girls brazenly escaped through a gate directly into the German-occupied quarter. They fled, not knowing that behind them, their families were being killed. After a 3-day hike, they linked up with other Jewish partisans hiding in the forest. Together, they survived the war. the Jewish resistance built forts in the forest to house its partisans. In contrast to other historical sites from the period, the authorities have allowed these bunkers to crumble.
This is like the wood, like you said it would. The wood?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. No.
Don't go in. Oh, it's falling.
Yeah.
From this hidden forest fort, about 400 Jewish partisans waged sabotage operations against the Nazis and their Lithuanian collaborators in support of Soviet partisans.
Am Israel Chai, von den Kibbutz von Israel.
We came to visit.
Despite the ongoing government intimidation, Fania continues to bring visitors to these decaying bunkers where she fought and survived.
What did you feel when you got here?
Ich habe gefühlt, als immer ein Mensch. Das ist sehr wichtig. Dann umgekommen in Kampf.
And those of us who perished fighting. Perished as proud humans.
I'm, you know, after everything you did, it's not right. It's just not right.
Well, to show me around. Right, I'm going to call Rachel then, and... Hi, Rachel, it's come again. Rachel? Hi, it's Danny. The phone keeps making these funny noises.
It's a whistling sound that a telephone expert told me is the result of some kind of eavesdropping, but as I have no secrets, I didn't go into it further, and I don't care.
It's like a piercing...
Yeah, I think it's because they consider Holocaust revisionism to be national security. That is one of the issues.
No, but sorry.
And they've told me so.
But if that piercing in my ear, that I could hardly speak to Rachel, is because you're a professor researching and writing about the Holocaust, and as a result, you're being spied on.
Could be.
Well, it's a little outrageous.
Yes, but not nearly as outrageous as accusing Holocaust survivors of being war criminals. So keeping perspective isn't easy, but having a Brooklyn background helps. We must not allow the nonsense about double genocide to infiltrate the West, or God forbid, become the standard history of the European Union. The strategy is quite simple. If there were two genocides and Nazi and Soviet crimes are equal, well, in that case, Soviet Union is the same as Hitler, and today's Russia is the successor state of that Hitler-like state, and therefore they should pay reparations. It's all out of George Orwell, of course.
And they deserve proper recognition. They deserve that communist criminals be brought to justice. But it's not genocide. That's not what communism was. It's not industrialized mass murder, which is unprecedented in human history.
Outraged by all he's learnt, Danny casts caution to the wind. He decides to confront the state prosecutor investigating Fania.
I met with Fania Brantowski.
Is she now, or has she ever been investigated for war crimes herself, or was she, or is she now just a witness in relation to alleged crimes?
Man atrodo, šitas klausimas jau yra aiškiai išspręstas prieš mažiausiai 2,5 metų. Jūsų paminėtoji Fania Brantowska buvo apklausta liudytoja.
The investigations relate to a 1944 attack on a village by Soviet partisans. 38 villagers died in the battle, and it's alleged that Jewish partisans were present, in particular Fania Brantowski and Rachel Margolis. Both women have been under investigation since 2008, but no charges have been laid. The cases, however, remain open. 90-year-old Margolis lives in exile in Israel, afraid to return to Lithuania.
My understanding is that Margolis is concerned about coming back to Lithuania. Is that a real fear? If she comes here, could she be investigated and prosecuted?
Are you her lawyer?
No, I'm just trying to clarify.
I will give my answers to the lawyer.
Are you Rachel Margolis' lawyer? Well, no, I'm not, but it's avoiding the question. If there is a case to bring it. Bring it. And if you're not bringing it, the question has to be asked, why not?
These prosecutors and the local right-wing historians all want to be able to write in 10 or 20 years, well, our prosecutors equally pursued Nazi and Soviet war criminals. They were all too old and they all died before the investigations are complete. It's all because of the bogus historic record they are creating.
It's time for Danny to leave. Keen to have some impact, he's decided to try to raise funds for an institute to protect Lithuanian Jewish memory, an organisation that can also employ Dovid.
I don't believe for 1 minute that we're going to change the Lithuanian government's mind. But we have a moral voice. They should be aware that Litvaks want to ensure that the memory of their families and the memory of their community is treated with honesty and integrity.
As Danny heads home to Melbourne, Dovid tells Rachel he's also leaving Vilnius to work in a second-hand bookshop he knows in Wales.
Von Wales can Berlin and Berlin can Vilnius.
Their campaign from now confined to cyberspace.
Fortunately for me, life carries on normal. Dovid is stuck on a hill in Wales, you know? Funya's name has been completely discredited. Rachel is stuck, and of course her whole status and the status of the greenhouse is very, very murky. So what am I doing that's heroic? Nothing. I'm just a witness, really.
While Danny chases some hopeful fundraising leads, Dovid's website breaks a confronting new story. The swastika has now been approved by the Lithuanian court for public display as a legitimate symbol of national heritage.
It's insulting. It is so insulting. This is blood of innocent people. Millions. 36 or 38 million people died in World War II because of this symbol.
Right-wing extremism and Nazism led to the death of democracy in Europe. So you cannot stand for independence, stand for freedom, and then relating your fight for freedom to kind of Nazism.
For Rachel, it's all become too much.
So I say I cannot anymore. I'm going to step down. I did until I could, right?
Soon after, Rachel gave up her role as head of the Holocaust department. And then, Dovid dropped another bombshell.
Hello? Dovid. I plan to close down the website and keep it as an archive of that period, unless there's going to be some kind of monthly grant to keep it going.
I would be very surprised and disappointed if we weren't able to get this money now, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah. Now, I could be...
You never know. We both know that, Danny.
Exactly.
Without the website, their battle is over. Danny waits anxiously for the reply from his donor.
I can't believe it. He said no. 3 months of talking and liaising, and I don't know what I'm going to do now. What's Dovid supposed to do from Wales? What can Rachel do on her own? We're rather stuffed.
And over in London, the rewriting history machine rolls on. Funded by government coffers, the Lithuanian embassy is staging an exhibition celebrating pre-war Jewish life. Everything up to the few shameful days they want to erase.
This is all part of the camouflage campaign. They're only telling part of the story that they want you to know.
Danny decides to oppose the exhibition. In a last-ditch effort to expose the double game, he's come to London with a letter of protest.
The ambassador has declined to meet, so I've got no idea what response we'll get. Dennis. Hi, I'm Danny.
British MP Dennis McShane is joining Danny to deliver the letter.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Danny Ben Moshe. You're saying the ambassador isn't here?
He's in the conference, so...
This letter is signed by 20 individuals from around the world, many of them Litvaks, Jews of Lithuanian descent. We're not prepared to accept that position of the Lithuanian government.
Hi, I'm Dennis McShane. I'm
Hello,
in Parliament.
nice to meet
Yes,
you.
nice to meet you. I am former Europe Minister and was there helping Lithuania come into the EU in 2004, so I consider myself a friend of Lithuania, but many of us are very, very concerned. And if anybody in European politics lends dignity to that notion of double genocide, then we are utterly devaluing the Holocaust and playing into the hands of the new anti-Jewish forces all over the world. So that's the reason I'm here.
Thank you, thank you. And this is not just like a Jewish issue, you know. It's a broader issue about ultranationalism, about democracy, about history, and
There's no doubt anti-Semitism is back. And people try and downplay it by saying, oh, it's just used by supporters of Israel. There is a new politics of intolerance right across Europe. There's a particularly, I think, in the States that are very nervous about their history.
A year later, Danny returns to meet Dovid in Lithuania. The threat has widened. A 2008 declaration is gaining momentum in the EU. Officially calling for the common treatment of Nazi and Soviet crimes across all of Europe, this Prague Declaration legitimizes rewriting the history.
There's no question that if the resolutions of the Prague Declaration are accepted, it would destroy 50 years of Holocaust education, commemoration, and research. Because they also want to rewrite all the textbooks in Europe in the spirit of equality, false equality, between communism and Nazism.
With double genocide in the mainstream, the two professors need a bold, new tactic.
I feel very honoured to be able to give whatever support I can to people like Fanya and Rachel, and we haven't been able to raise money that I wanted to raise to have this organisation with Dovid, but in the absence of that, we're having political success. The Lithuanian embassies around the world are concerned about what we're doing.
But a week ago, the rumour started that Dovid had been made persona non grata. And I called Dovid as soon as I got in, and there's no reply. I'm gonna email it and see if it's emailed me.
Danny has some good news. He's raised just enough to fund Dovid's website a few more months.
Yes, Dovid. Welcome to Vilnius. What does he say? Hello, Danny. Welcome to Vilnius. All will be wonderful as soon as we get our bearings. This is 16. I remember this happened last time. No, not that block. No, I don't know where the entrance is. I might have to call him. Dovid. Found him. Hey! Dovid! Sorry. Your neighbour's not very impressed. Thanks.
He's a very seasoned traveller.
Good to see you. We wanted to have an office here, we wanted to employ you, etc., etc. And we failed.
We failed completely,
right?
everybody did.
Completely. And I think a counter-Prague declaration is maybe the most important thing because it's on the record, it's documented.
And MEPs in Brussels might be inspired to sign a document once there is one. We now need to find one master parliamentarian from Brussels who will rephrase these 3 or 4 into the kind of document that his or her colleagues in the European Parliament will sign.
Yes and no. David and tone down is an oxymoron. He just doesn't do tone down, and that's his strength, you know. But a strength can also be a weakness. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. I'm probably a bit too diplomatic.
Not so the authorities. With the Prague Declaration supporting their double genocide agenda in the EU, they take the campaign against Jewish war veterans up a notch.
It was the end of August when I heard from Joe Melamed that Israeli police had come to see him at the demand of the Lithuanian prosecutors to tell him that he's wanted in Lithuania for having published a book in 1999 about Lithuanian alleged war criminals. And Lithuanian prosecutors did nothing from 1999 till August 2011 when they went after Melamed instead of going after the perpetrators. So it's a metaphor for the whole darn thing.
Lithuania is a laboratory for the campaign to rewrite the history of World War II. And they have plenty of people waiting in the wings in other countries to see how this plays out.
But over 10 years ago, the Lithuanian government had already set up a special commission to evaluate Nazi and Soviet crimes, bolstered by the recruitment of international historians like Konrad Kwiet.
I resigned from the commission last year when I realized more or less what was going on.
You know, the zealots are in the mainstream. So to oppose the zealots makes you seem extreme. It's just part of everything being turned upside down here. And to be honest, it's a little bit scary, you know, going into the Prime Minister's office in a country where it's a criminal offence to dispute the double genocide, to dispute the double genocide. Like advisors?
Advisors and permanent staff of the government.
Okay.
Please.
Thank you very much.
Does the Commission support this notion of double genocide?
Absolutely no. It's again. I would.
So that's a Prague. That's the Prague Declaration is quite separate.
It's Prague Declaration. I support Prague Declaration, and we generally the idea. I personally, I support Prague Declaration, and we can discuss certain sentences which could be treated as attempt to equalize these totalitarian regimes.
I don't think anyone would say that Lithuanians didn't suffer terribly, cruelly, problematically. Sorry, let me just finish. But I think somehow it's used in this comparative context, even if there were similarities, they were so substantially different in terms of a racial premeditated plan for mass extermination that it diminishes what genocide was, what genocide is, and what happened to the Jewish community here.
What have I been doing for 20 years? I've been looking for the last Jew in Smargon, the last Jew in Lida, the last. So I certainly had learned the narrative of the Holocaust from a few thousand eyewitnesses. Dobke, Freitke, was Herze? Wie ist die Stimmung?
Sehr gut.
Was macht die Mama? Dobke, Shalom Aleichem. Was Herze?
Die Nennsten alle sind ausgewählt dabei. Und die ganze Litwiner, alle. Zunächst genommen, alle freuen wie die Kinder. Und das mit bisschen Kinderlach auf die Hände. Kommen einer mit einem großen Weg. Und im Normal hat viele haben sie gekannt. Und hat zunächst genommen alle Kinder. Alle Kinder von den Freunden, was hat mit sich zunächst genommen. Und man hat die Grube dort sind fertig als Ding. Ist zugefahren mit dem großen Weg. Und Lebendigkeit. Geworfen alle Männer, das ist gekreuzigt.
It's still a shame that some Lithuanians we collaborated. We collaborated with the Nazis and took part in this brutal extermination of their neighbors.
But weren't there days, the immediate days after the Soviets left, 22 June, when the killing started in Kovno at the hands of the Lithuanians before the Germans or Nazis arrived?
I don't know and no one historian, listen, no one historian for me presented any evidence, proved evidence, that killings of Jews by Lithuanians started based on racial basis, started before German came.
Over the last decade, 98-year-old Dobka has been religiously drawing her nightmares and documenting her story.
Mit der Mord um ungefähr die Deutschen?
Keine Deutschen, die dort nicht gewinnen. Nur Litwiner.
Now, it's not fair to generalize. Of course, those Lithuanians who saved Jews had to be more brave than anybody else because they were going against their own people's leadership. But the major trend was these local nationalists who were putting on white armbands were slaughtering girls, women, babies, rabbis. That is why the murder rate was so high here, the highest in Holocaust-era Europe, around 96%.
On Danny's last night in Lithuania, the two professors thrash out their counter-Prague declaration.
If you had to list the 3 big points in the statement, what would they be?
The only thing that's needed now is a reply to the Prague Declaration that gets traction with members of the European Parliament. And part of the reason we have not succeeded is that we have not gone for the Prague Declaration.
It has to exist on its own right on positive criteria rather than criticising the Lithuanian government.
Of particular concern is the call for a single new day to jointly commemorate the victims of both Stalin and Hitler.
We all know that in real life there ain't going to be 2 days of commemoration for the Holocaust. So either we're going to mention the things we're fighting against or it's not worth doing.
I don't know what the answer is or how we're going to do it. What I do know is that we have to find an answer and we have to do it. I haven't heard back yet from my...
While Danny fine-tunes the counter-Prague declaration, Dovid's website reports that in Lithuania, the blurring of history continues.
All the things that the left were doing on killing Jews is just not mentioned. This is official honouring by the Lithuanian government and the Genocide Centre of the left. Today, 2011.
Seizing the historic opportunity provided by the forthcoming 70th anniversary of Wannsee, the conference where the Third Reich adopted the final solution of Jewish genocide, the professors plan to release their declaration on Dovid's website at midnight on the anniversary. With only a month to go, Danny lobbies frantically for signatories.
Taking a stand on this issue is something everyone of every political persuasion should be able to put their name to. So for the declaration to have that effect, it has to have that substance.
After a shaky start, Danny's persistence pays off.
Yes. The foreign spokesman for this conservative political group.
I'm really delighted how many parliamentarians, not just from Western countries, but from Lithuania and from Latvia and Romania and Hungary, where double genocide is very mainstream, have put their names to a declaration that is quite explicit.
With a symbolic 70 signatories, the online release of the Professor's 70th anniversary declaration prompts an immediate outcry. The local signatories are lambasted, fringe groups make death threats, and the foreign minister's quip that the only difference between Hitler and Stalin is their moustache size prompts international comment.
Whoever thought we'd get this far, Danny? Thanks to you, thanks to all of us.
We need some champions who would run with this. We're not professional European Union lobbyists who know how the game works in that parliament. How can the declaration be taken further and translated into policy?
Historical revisionists usually went by the way of academic conferences, books, television programs, documentaries. In our case, They took their far-right revisionism right into the European Parliament through the back door with the Prague Declaration of 2008. Now, we are not going to stop it being one of the ideas out there. That's not an issue. The issue is that we will succeed in not allowing the Prague Declaration to become the standard history of Europe.
All these are issues that cannot be ignored. I am personally very happy to be associated to this initiative.
The fact that 8 Lithuanian Social Democrats signed the 70 Years Declaration is a historic turning point in our fight back. So I think the next steps must involve saying the European Parliament will no longer be the ballpark for the far right to push through deceptive resolutions. That we have to declare them equal, and if we don't declare them equal...
That is not only wrong, but it is creating a new path towards what? Towards a new dictatorship? Could be. Because if you are not ready to face the real history, then you could fall into the next historical trap.
At Danny's request, Gert Weiskirchen has arranged for Dovid to present the 70th anniversary declaration to Martin Schulz, president of the EP.
From the streets of Vilnius to the president of the European Parliament, it shows how a small group of people determined to get a second view in can do it. So we're very honored to present to you the 70 Years Declaration. It was signed on the 20th of January, on the 70th anniversary of the Wannsee Conference, and we're deeply grateful to the 70 European parliamentarians who have signed, and we're very grateful to be here today.
Thank you very much.
And we offer it to you for consideration as hopefully the start of a dialogue and a process. Thank you.
Nice. This is a daily fight. The Holocaust is a unique crime in history. Never in history existed a country, a state, defining the systematic extermination of another people as a goal of the state. This is unique and not comparable. So thank you very much for this initiative and for the declaration. This is very, very important for us, and we can assure you we will fight with all our energy.
Freedom of thought has won the day. We have stopped that movement that had been going under the radar. Somebody had to show the world that this is happening and has to be stopped.